Hey guys, Nickon here to review the 2016 Winter Wave Toa. Now just to be clear, I won't be following this video up with a third one about Umarak immediately. I'll save that until the Summer Wave is released and compare the two versions of him that will be out by then. I will, however, take a moment to give a few of my thoughts on him at the end of this video, a mini review of sorts, so you'll have some idea of how good I think he is. Okay, so I'm gonna play things pretty straight this time. No big speeches about the fate of the franchise that go on for 20 minutes of a 45-minute long video. Just my thoughts on the actual sets as sets so I don't wear myself out editing this. With that, some things you'll find common among these sets. Because these Toa need to be able to support the weight of their creature when combined, all of the current Toa have friction extenders added to their ankles. Tahu was the only one who did this last year, which was somewhat hidden by his giant shin armor, but in most cases, they don't make any effort to hide it or add some new twist to it here. And it really doesn't look that bad. It only starts to get annoying when you combine these noticeably taller ankles with very short shins and comparatively long thighs. We'll get into that later, since some of these characters suffer this unsightly combination much more than others. They also all have hip extensions, something only most of them had last year, again to accommodate the extra weight they'll be carrying if you like this year's gimmick, which in some cases makes their thighs even longer. Again, we'll get to that. I also want to address the style of these sets, which feature some bold new molds, and even bring back an oldie in the form of 2009's armor plate used by the Vorax and Skrull. I think this was a great piece to bring back. I didn't care much for it back in the day. I thought it was too wide, too open, too thin, and too easy to bend or break. It's a good fit for these sets though, because being so wide makes it easily compatible with CCBS, as some of the ways they use this piece are pretty cool, even more involved and creative than they did back in the day. Not all of these examples are pulled off so gracefully, but points for finding so many new ways to use an old piece. One of the new pieces that also works great this way is the piece of unification that all the creatures have on their chests and all of the larger characters have on their backs. A couple of the Toa uses as armor on other parts of their bodies too, and it works well, much in the way Onua shovels did last year, with a whopping 8 connection points, and not a single socket needed to make it compatible with CCBS bones. It just wraps around them, with a pin being all it takes to hold it in place, or something on the other side. Even better, it works just fine with old Bionicle sets too. Compare that to the similar, yet much more specialized Nickon thigh plate, which only had one connection point, could only fit a couple of certain ways around certain pieces, and was basically just there for looks, and see how much we've advanced since then. This is a bold move by LEGO. I mean, they didn't have to do this. They could have just made another CCBS add-on like they did last year, but no, they're still making completely new components like this to work with other pieces that they don't even make anymore, but they know a fair number of us still have those older pieces laying around, so they're giving us a chance to keep putting those pieces to use and new mocs and such along with the new parts. I love this, and I hope they release more retroactive pieces like this that blur the line between the old and new systems, and bring them closer together. Another thing I love about these is just how much they add to the Toa's overall shape. Last year we got roundish, bulky masks on super short, super skinny necks that didn't look right at all if you placed the armor a little lower, exposing the stock. But these sets, while still technically having the same neck, create the illusion of having a thicker neck thanks to this piece, even the pistons on the sides adding to it like weird jugulars. We see more of the Toa's necks this year, but they end up looking more filled out, more alive, and just plain better for it because this piece does so many things, and I love it for that. And as big as this piece is, it's still just small enough that you can line it up with a 2009 armor as an extra layer, and the piece of Unity's pistons fit the shape of the plate perfectly. You see what I mean about blurring the lines between old and new? It just works. And then there's the more standard fare, the crystalline add-ons on the Toa's weapons. I am a little annoyed that 5 of this year's Toa use the same blade piece, just in slightly different ways, yeah, but I will say I appreciate their consistency with other pieces, and I like how the new blades look sorta like Tahu's original fire sword back in 2001. Some of these Toa's textures are all over the place, but at least these weapons, along with the creature heads, the crystal armor add-on, and the Toa's new masks, at least the gold ones, show a clear effort to create a new crystal theme, like you see on the box art, with these giant formations growing around the Mask of Unity altars. Surprisingly, this texture add-on doesn't clash much with a piece of Unity, since they both have pistons around the same spot, and you can even place one over the other and have it look okay. And the 2009 armor they brought back is just neutral and blank enough that it doesn't take away from the new textures introduced in any obvious way. The colors of the new add-on all look pretty good, though I'm a little confused by the decision not to include a trans-purple blend, with the otherwise huge focus on trans-purple elements in Onua and Tarak. I guess they wanted to release at least one version of this piece that wouldn't stick out on mocs by using one specific color, but it comes off as kinda weak sauce to me, especially since we get so many other colors and they're all beautiful. And don't get me wrong, if there was a colorful piece behind these that would sort of shine through the clear part, that's fine, that's a nice idea, but we mostly just get ordinary black. How riveting. Also, if you thought there was a huge focus on translucent elements before, these new figures have even more of these pieces, mostly Borak eyes, and some new sizes for bones and shells in these colors. Again, I get the impression that this is just part of the whole crystal theme they're creating, and it works well enough. Onua pulls this off the best, I think, with the appearance of jagged shapes growing over his shoulders, probably super strong stuff that's too heavy for the other Toa to carry themselves, and entire chunks of his body being made of some crystalline form of a porodermis-like substance. It suits the character best out of all of them, though the others pull it off pretty well too. When I look at Tahu, I get a feel like his body is partially made of fire that's just being contained by a mostly golden body of armor, sort of like the way Makuta was depicted in G1 as a sentient gas cloud containing a robot frame, and Gali and Kopaka work it well enough since it's always easy for them to pull off the "my body is made of ice or water" look. I also deeply appreciate the new focus on darker transblue elements that Gali was sorely lacking last year. Each Toa and their smaller companion sets seem to have one signature trans color attached to them. It's part of their element, yet she didn't have any such pieces last year, opting instead for the same light blue that's kinda Kopaka's thing. Giving her a bigger focus on dark transblue elements that represent water and giving Kopaka the bigger focus on lighter transblue elements that represent ice go a long way towards differentiating the two, even if they still both use light transblue bones underneath. Pohatu's trans elements could be sulfur, I suppose. Lewa doesn't really have any reason to incorporate trans elements into his body and didn't last year, but again, it's part of this year's theme and it helps him fit in with the others. I guess his trans green elements could be super hard tree sap, like the amber with a mosquito in it in Jurassic Park. That could be cool. In fact, I'm kinda surprised LEGO didn't give him some trans green bones, now they're being released in new sizes this wave. I guess they just didn't want him to look sort of like Umarak since he already uses that color, but they've never been so conservative when it comes to heroes and villains both getting trans orange parts in previous years. Oh well. If you were ever waiting to stock up on Borak eyes in this color, which I think is new for them, he comes with 8 of them. Sheesh. Going back to the masks, I like most of them quite a bit, even a little more than last year's masks. The normal ones have this weird silver hair slicked back look, and I know some people can't stand it, but personally I think it's cool, at least on characters that already have a lot of other silver parts. I'm not gonna lie, on Tahu in particular is a little weird, but dang it, Kopaka is a perfect fit for this look. I also like that the jagged bits on a lot of these aren't perfectly symmetrical. It feels like something growing out of the mask, something alive, and along with the Anubis symbols, you have a lot of other runes too. It's not an insane amount of detail, but these are good details. These masks have an intense new art direction, and there are some things that bug me about each, but I can live with it, and like I said before, the golden counterparts fit in great with the whole crystal theme. But yeah, LEGO sure loves crystals, don't they? Now we come to the loudest and most divisive piece of all, the clump. Yeah, we've all heard the complaints that the 2015 sets look like Hero Factory with a Bionicle name and that the shells are too smooth and CCBS isn't a good look for Bionicle and all that. I already addressed this last year, so I won't repeat myself, though I will say this new chest piece is, in some ways, hilarious. We all like pistons, don't we? That's Bionicle's entire appeal, according to some people. That's all it was ever about for us, was the pistons everywhere. If you look back at the Toa Mata, though, they didn't really look that super detailed. Probably because they were small and there was only so much room for these details to be crammed in, but the pistons that were there were placed in really intelligent ways, in spots where hydraulics would work great for an at least 3/4 robotic character. The ones behind the knees, for example, or the ones on either side of the waist, those are essentially muscles for these guys. This is how they move, in your imagination anyway. By the time the Bionicle were released, though, we started seeing loads of pistons everywhere, and not that many of them actually looked very helpful or practical because they weren't anywhere near the joints now that these figures were more posable. So a lot of them didn't make much sense and were clearly just there to make these things appear more complex than they are, like the aforementioned Anaka thigh plate. Even the Toa Metroid didn't overdo it quite like this and show a more restrained effort to place whatever pistons they have in more sensible spots, like on the shoulders, to create the illusion that the top part moves independently from the rest of the arm. But the Onika's designers just went kinda crazy and put pistons everywhere. And now we come to this. 21 pistons on a single piece. What do most of these even do? I like how some of them are placed to look like ribs or collarbones, but this is overdoing it a bit. Don't get me wrong though, I do like this piece. I know a lot of people don't because they've gotten so used to the smoother general CCBS look, and don't think trying to bring back that old school Bionicle feel is worth doing in such a drastic overdone way if it ends up clashing hard against other CCBS pieces. They would rather not have pieces like this, and just leave plain old CCBS the way it is for better consistency. And that's fine, but I think these Toa have enough detail in other places that it blends right in, somewhat anyway. I won't lie, my first instinctual assumption when I saw these in preliminary pictures, the first thing that ran through my mind was that they must have whipped up this piece to address the criticisms of last year's sets not looking Bionicle enough, that they threw up their hands and went, "Fine, you want pistons? Have pistons out the nose, have pistons out the wazoo, have pistons coming out of your ears, we'll give you so many pistons you won't know what to do with them all." In which case, I'd say, we kind of asked for this, guys. But for all we know, this piece was designed at least a couple years ago, so if that's how things went, I find it kind of funny that LEGO was apparently able to foresee the coming backlash they'd get for the way 2015's Toa looked, and created this piece to satisfy those people. But they just weren't able to squeeze it into that line's new parts for the year budget, and had to wait another year to release something like this. I will say I really like the shape of it. It wraps around and bulks up the sides of the Toa more, and it's very long, with a much more lean, streamlined shape than the previous torso armor that's super skinny and small in some places, only to suddenly be super wide in others. It even sticks out a little further, giving you more room to fit more pieces underneath, which is what's made most of the Toa's unique new builds possible. This has better angles all over, I think. And yes, I really like the printings on these. In fact, I like them even more than last year's printings. Those printings were an okay representation of Akoto's tribes, looking almost like war paint the Akotans themselves marked the Toa with. But these feel more like something meant to represent the Toa themselves, as individuals, something just for them. I love how each one seems built around the Nuva symbol in the middle, the patterns flowing out of them, like the way Onua's is very blocky with lots of corners and stairs, and Pohatu's is patchy and dirty. They also add some much needed splashes of color to what would otherwise be a huge monochromatic block eating up the Toa's bodies. They even have a few extra colors providing additional accents without detracting too much from the core colors, and I really appreciate that they also went the extra mile with some lower printings so there isn't just an empty space down there. I think the one who benefits most from his printings might be Kopaka, Tahu being a close second. This piece is kind of amazing in a way. It seems to be a perfect little microcosm, the physical manifestation of the ongoing debate surrounding these sets in G2 at large. It's more polarizing than any other single piece I've seen since the first wave was released, even more than the Gearbox. Even so, it doesn't clash much with the other new pieces they've released this year, only the standard flat CCBS shells, which we seem to be seeing less and less of over time. Last time I was able to talk about each Toa individually because they were all so different in a lot of ways. The designers were doing everything they could with what they had at the time, which really wasn't much. This year the Toa have a much more consistent look all across the board, with new torso armor, the piece of unity, the weapons, the crystal add-ons, the other add-ons, the masks, the creature heads, the 2009 plating, and even little things like the Borak eyes. These figures are all clearly part of a team, and they still look different enough, thanks to some very experimental builds and unique color placement, that they don't look too samey, too uniform, but they're clearly going for a theme here, like the Skull villains were, and they push this new direction as far as they can, even bringing back a lot of the more old-school feel in the process. I'll finish my thoughts on this new aesthetic at the end of the review, though. I do still have some things to say about each Toa and their combinations, so let's start with Tahu. Tahu, I think, probably came out the best. He isn't perfect, though, far from it. The upper body looks consistent enough, though the withered skull villain pieces drooping over the shoulders are an interesting choice to say the least. Some don't appreciate the lack of red and the huge focus on gold and trans-orange parts, but as I said before, I like the way it looks like Tahu has become a more elemental, fiery being that just flows inside a mostly golden oven-like frame. Kinda makes me imagine sets of the Element Lords from Bionicle's Twilight years, like if they ever got sets made for them like they were supposed to. They might have come out looking something like this, with a more elemental, almost spiritual feel. I think it's really cool how every stretch from his shoulders to his hands has a trans-orange piece, whether it's a bone or a plate, alternating between each. It's consistent at least. It creates a flow, a pattern. The silver gloves are off, so to say. I also do like the blue lines on the chest printing. They stand out quite a bit, but they're not obnoxious. They just create a bit of contrast with the warmer colors that make up the rest of him. And hey, it matches his eyes, sorta. Once you get to his legs, though, things get kinda weird. I don't care much for these bones being gray, but I can live with it, I guess. It's just sorta dull next to everything else. What really bothers me, though, is how super long they are. Too much for the piece of unity to cover much of the thighs, despite being a pretty big piece. Then we get to his shins and feet. The ankles don't look too bad, and I can appreciate the Borak eyes filling them out just a bit somehow, even if the color is a tad more out of place here than it is on the chest. But dang it, those shins! Don't get me wrong, the armor looks fine, but the shin bones are too short under those thighs. When I first saw leaks of these guys, I was seriously worried that the shins would only be half as long as his thighs, because they'd only have the budget to make orange bones in one size. As it turns out though, no, they released it in 2 sizes, but it's still just a tad too short. Ugh, why? Now thanks to that one extra hole, it is just long enough not to be that glaring. But I still wish these shins were just a little longer, or that the thighs were a little shorter. Tahu was lucky enough to avoid his proportions being downright crazy, but some of the others weren't. He's a lot taller than his previous self, who was already the tallest Toa before, but his proportions are actually a bit better. He's a bit slimmer, his torso is a little longer and more filled out, at least in some areas. He does feel more streamlined and efficient than his previous self, and his weapons are pretty cool too. He won't be needing a lava board now that he can fly, and I know some people were really disappointed that we don't get a lava board every year, but last year's lava board was already so good and so big, I don't see how they were supposed to top it this time. And do you really want to buy the same things over and over again? These swords, for what they do, are very cool. They're not super long, but turning the gear on each makes a big difference. I can see him stabbing a foe and then splitting them even more with a moving part of the blade, or catching an enemy's blade between the 2 parts of one of his and pulling it out of their hand or flinging it away. And yes, if the one protruding axle is any indication, you can combine them into one 2-handed weapon, but not without horribly twisting one of Tahu's wrists to do it. Still, it looks good, especially with the blades fully extended, giving it a huge reach. In fact, you'll notice there's a pretty big focus on 2-handed weapons this year. I also really like his mask. It's not quite like last year's. I'd say it conveys the same personality as the first, only a little more intensely so, and maybe a little younger looking. The transition from one to the next has been much smoother and much more consistent for the character than his 2003 or 8 updates were, and yet it's still so fresh and new. It's just cool. Now that we get to the combination, merging Tahu with Akir, especially while wearing the Unity mask, suddenly makes so many of his weird aesthetic quirks go away, or even turns some of his weaknesses into strengths. A lot of his varying textures complement or feel completed by Akir's, the greatest example being Tahu's shoulders. With that bird head sitting atop his own head, they look like huge tufts of golden feathers, and he wears the additional gold bits like the tail well. Tahu is already pretty cool, but in this form, he's sensational. And when you add his turning waist, the extending weapons, and Akir's flapping wings together, that gives him a total of 3 gear functions. Dang! Tahu is the clearest example, I think, of a figure that easily could have suffered for his gimmick, instead benefiting greatly from these features. If you only feel like getting one pair from this wave, I definitely recommend Tahu and Akir first. This is the Tahu we know ascending to a whole new level. He looks almost biblical in this form, like a fiery gold-plated angel. It's awesome. Also, because of the way his shoulder armor is attached, he can shrug just a little bit. So there's that. Kopaka is an interesting case. His legs feel a little better proportioned than Tahu's, and his arms are about the right length, but they're placed just a little too high. He's a less extreme case of Lewa, as we'll see in a bit. Overall, his proportions aren't bad, though I wish his shins were just a little longer so he'd have more range around his ankles. In fact, that also goes for some of the other Toa. Then again, maybe this stopper was intentional so he wouldn't fall forward when combined with Melon. His color scheme is loose, shall we say, but I like it. Sure, I could do without the gold on his thighs, but I've tried replacing them with the silver versions Gali comes with, but on top of those silver shins, it ends up looking a little bland. It feels like such a shame they didn't put just a little more into the budget and make these Unity pieces white like they appear to be in this early image, and I have no doubt that they were white for a time. I mean, his sword was gold, you can't tell me it just looks that way because of the lighting or whatever. If these were still white, I could deal with a thigh armor being silver. Together with his arms though, it gives him a heavily armored look, like his real body is mostly white, but he just has all this other stuff piled over it. At first I thought I wanted these shoulder plates to be white too, but I think the silver goes great with his mask and suits his character. I even tried replacing the huge dark blue arm bits with the white ones he came with last year, and you know what? It looked cleaner, sure, but it actually looked kinda boring. Even with the stickers that sorta match his new chest printing. I get the feeling there was a lot of debate behind the scenes over what colors they should use for Kopaka. In the end, his aesthetic is not what I'm used to seeing. Last year I said Kopaka looked like he had it together. He looked clean, he looked tight, he looked shiny, while some of the other characters looked a little more messy. This Kopaka is completely different. He looks like someone who's had it rough. Like he's been on his own for so long that he's kinda stopped trying to keep up appearances and is just scraping by whatever way he can, lumbering from battle to battle and being chipped away a little more each time, mending the scars with the spoils he claims. He has a withered warrior feel, bringing things like Berserk, Dark Souls, and even Game of Thrones to mind. Really brutal stuff like that, you know? He juggles a lot of colors for many battles and looks messy, yes, but it's in a very purposeful way, like there is a rhyme and reason to it. And this must have been so hard for the designers to pull off. In some ways, he is the total opposite of everything he was last year. And you know what? I dig it. I greatly support this bold new direction. I think it fits his character better than almost any other interpretation we've ever seen of him, which sounds crazy, I know. But once you see him in hand, and can stand him up next to the likes of Tahu or even last year's Kopaka, you'll see how unique he is and how much gravitas he has. The battered but unflinching expression on his mask and unusual scope placement just adds to this feel. Also, I love that you can switch out the scope's color with other stud pieces. That's so cool! And his weapons add to this feel as well. The sword looks brutal. It's so big, but it's not that heavy, just imposing. The horns used for the hilt are a good touch, and the gun, I didn't like this idea at first, but I think it's an okay compromise since we do still get a shield out of it. Sure, it's a much smaller, lighter one, but it's a decent size, big enough to fit some stickers onto it, and I can easily see him raising it up to block attacks when he's not shooting, or smacking someone with the sight of it. He even carries an ammo clip on his thigh. How cool is that? He looks prepared for anything that comes his way. And sure, that may not be consistent with the way he's portrayed in the actual storyline, where Akimu built the stuff for him and he changed it to his armor in like a day, but I could pretend, right? This is how I will see this character from now on. His combination with Melem is kinda weird. It does add to his look. The thought crystals make more sense now. The colors he juggles feel more balanced, as was the case with Tahu and Nikir. He even looks sort of like he has jet boosters on his shoulders now, and he looks pretty nice standing next to Tahu. The two complement each other with how different they are, as was the case last year. But like I said in the creatures video, you can't really do anything with Melem. His function is pretty useless. He's just there to bulk up Kopaka a bit. Whether I could recommend either as a standalone figure is up in the air, though I'm pretty sure I could say I recommend Kopaka if things went that way. Unfortunately, the two, Melem more so, do still end up feeling a little bare bones for it. The two are packaged together as a sort of beginner set, not in terms of construction, since Kopaka does have some very involving and pretty complex builds, but they're made to give you an idea of what the line is about, to initiate you into the year. Do I recommend them that way? Well, for the price, sure. Kopaka almost feels like a $20 set, more like $17 or $18, and you don't get a shadow trap with either of them, but I'd say it's a pretty good deal. It is cheaper than the other larger sets and their animals, and I will say the two look great together as companions. Melem in all his simplicity complements Kopaka, like he's one of the rare few things a Toa would accept following him around. I'd imagine Melem as quiet and endearing to the Toa, who doesn't care about his flaws or shortcomings. Pohatu is a decent set. He's not anything amazing, but he is pretty interesting. His color scheme is kinda crazy, and like with Kopaka, feels like it went through a lot of phases before they got to where they felt this was acceptable. I've seen a lot of different revamps of this figure, and I've even tried changing some of the colors around a bit, but everything I tried felt wrong to a point, and actually made him look kinda worse. I'll give LEGO credit, they took a look that should not work and made it work about as well as they conceptually could, but again, I feel like there's this weird insecurity when it comes to stone-themed characters. Like they can't just make him brown, they gotta add some weird twist to him out of desperation to spice him up and sell just a few more of these to kids who don't think he's interesting. His construction is pretty awkward, but not bad. I do like the shoulder build and the posing options it adds. Kopaka's shoulders are cool, yeah, and they're rock solid, but they're really bulky and not the best for posing. Pohatu's are just as over the top, but they don't interfere nearly as much. It feels like you can move a lot more of him in this area than we typically get with Bionicle figures, if only because of the shape and where they attach to on the body. It's a neat trick that adds a lot of expressiveness. However, he does suffer in a few ways. I guess because they wanted to create some consistency with last year's sets, the designers made him the shortest of the group once again. But unfortunately, his legs are a little too short, considering the body is the same length as all the others. He does suffer a bit for his waist gimmick, which I'll get into later because they couldn't make the torso any smaller without removing the mechanism. I get it, it had to be done, but they at least could have made his legs a little longer, at least the shins. I mean, they've released just about every other recolor for this bone size they could have this year, so why does Pohatu get left out? Why should he get the short end of the stick? Because brown characters are boring to kids and don't sell as much? Well, maybe they would sell a little more if they came with more nice parts. His arms are a good length for the body, but depending on how you bend them, they could suddenly wind up looking super short. Pohatu's proportions aren't terrible, but he does come off as a bit stumpy and awkward. Then there's his color scheme, which is an even bigger issue for some people. Technically, he does have more color than last time, but a lot of it is the wrong color, they say. Surprisingly though, the dark tan has grown on me. I think it's a nice transition from the brighter burnt orange of his mask and upper arms to the silver boots, and the burnt orange and dark brown splotches on his chest pretty much save this from completely falling apart. Not too ornate, just the faintest hints of a culture. I like the upper arms because as bare as they are, they give the impression that this is Pohatu's natural color, like Kopaka's white, but he's just wearing the silver bits and additional dark tan armor over a mostly burnt orange body, and I appreciate it the same way I appreciate Kopaka's colors, even if not as much. He looks very tribal, not really primitive, but he has that hardened wastelander feel that he did last year, only even more so now. He looks like he lives in a hellish desert like in Mad Max. I can't say it isn't appropriate at least. I am glad they kept the mask's color though. If it was dark tan too, I wouldn't know what I was looking at. The bright yellowish trans neon green also adds some splashes of life to him, even though the plates on top of the same colored bones is a bit much. Still, he pulls it off better than I thought he would. Heck, pairing him up with Kopaka, who has a similarly rough feel, makes me kind of want to see an entire wave of figures made with this style, this harsh and more brutal Mad Max aesthetic. The weapon is weird. I do miss the boomerangs, though I do appreciate giving the stone-themed character a big rock to swing around. I just wish it was easier to separate from the blade without looking like he accidentally broke the thing. It's another two-handed weapon that's built around the gimmick. The mask looks great. It is a gentle shape with long sweeping curves that make me think of churning desert dunes shaped by the wind. It has a tough but fair expression, making him look imposing without coming off as a savage. He looks very contemplative about his actions. Combined with Kitar, he's kind of a mess. There are so many shades of brown, but I do think the chaos of it kinda works. Kitar's gimmick still works just fine, and it's more useful than Melem's at least. It's hard to point the blades forward without hitting Pohatu, but I can see him using them to fend off attackers coming from the sides, which seems like a pretty ideal use for the creature if you ask me. I mean, what's the point of having extra arms if you can't reach other places with them? The only thing that truly bugs me is how the golden mask clashes with Kitar's silver head, but I guess it couldn't really be avoided without changing too many other things. It's hard for me to say this is the worst combination. It is the worst creature paired with what just might be the worst Toa. The colors are everywhere, he's a pile of blades and legs, but it's still a cool combination, as fierce as he is messy, and more useful than some of the others. So I'll give him that. I guess these guys just become better together than they are apart, though I can't call them bad sets on their own. They're just okay at worst. And like I said last time, if this is the bottom of the barrel, then Bionicle's in pretty good shape. I'm just glad he was finally able to get his rock back after 15 years. Onua is the cleanest looking Toa of the group by far. He juggles his colors beautifully and has good proportions, though in his case, he seems to have the opposite problem that the others do. His legs aren't too short, they're a good length, and they're appropriately bulky for Onua. So are the arms, but the core, the body, is just a tad smallish. They try to bulk it up in so many little ways, oh they try. But there is no hiding that it's still just the same torso armor everyone else has. I didn't expect him to use a super wide chest that they did last year, so I'm kinda glad they didn't. This is a good evolution for Onua. Like Tahu, his proportions are more evened out. He looks slimmer than before, but not like he's actually lost any muscle for it. More like Akimu somehow found a way to achieve the same horsepower with smaller parts that use up less space, as happens with technology over time. And he wears this body better than most, I think. He does come off as very rugged, but lean, like he has a swagger in his step. I just don't think they pulled off this new look perfectly, but they did alright. The legs and feet look a teensy bit mismatched, but he still comes off as pretty beefcakey. Overall, he looks great, and he makes a good next step for the character. Like Kopaka, he comes with a stud shooter, only this one's in the back of the drill. Spinning the drill fires the studs. Unfortunately, this does mean the drill can't turn freely on its own without firing, but it's no big deal. It's still a neat function. It's certainly the most unique of all the Toa's new weapons, despite being made of a bunch of old plain Jane pieces we've seen before. They're just used in a nifty new way here, which is the beauty of LEGO, I think. I also like the placement of the ammo. When the drill is facing this way though, I can't help imagining there's a rocket on the other side that shoots it forward like a splitting maul with such force that it would take someone as strong as Onua just to wield it so it wouldn't fly out of his hands. That's one of my favorite weapons in science fiction, and it's cool to see something at least somewhat resembling that. And set-wise, it's probably my favorite of the Toa's two-handed weapons. Onua, as stretched out and spread apart as he is, does feel big, really big, thanks to some special tricks, and he's probably the most fun out of all the Toa to build. Another note, I am so happy we finally get trans-purple studs. Where were these last year? His combination with Tarek is basically the same as Kopaka and Melem. They don't even try to hide it in the show, but it is a little different in practice. Like I said in the creatures video, I can see him using Tarek's arms to dig forward like they're swimming through the rock, and it's fun enough to enact this with the toys. As for how they look together, the colors are great and the proportions work too, as if he didn't have enough bulk up there already. Not much else to say here, really. Lastly, I'll talk about his mask. It's alright. I don't like it the same way I liked his previous mask, and while that one was small to make his already huge body feel even bigger, this mask actually is pretty big, and it does end up having a weird effect in some areas, but surprisingly enough, it does still work, with its sharp angles and broad shapes. I just wish it covered a little more of his head. Then we get to Gali, who makes me feel so conflicted. There are a lot of things about her that I really like. All sorts of neat little touches, like that little blue vent on her back. That's nice. Let's just say she's probably gone through the biggest change besides Onua. I do quite like her colors. She does have a lot more color than she did before, with lots of blues everywhere, topped off by a bit of orange. Like I said, I love the darker pieces, and layered over the lighter bones, they create a cool effect. The more solid blue is alright, and I don't mind the orange bits like some do. Some just can't stand the asymmetry of it, and some think there's way too much orange. Surprisingly though, I've seen some people make Photoshop edits that include more orange, so she's like half that and half normal solid blues. But I think the orange she has now is just the right amount. The only way I could see adding more orange is if more blue was added in places as well to balance things out. As is, I like the placement of the orange as an accent color, especially over the shoulder. Like I said with Akita, it's meant to make us think of clownfish and other exotic creatures like that, maybe even especially brightly colored types of coral. It creates a splash of life in what would otherwise be an empty blue sea. As is, Gali is extremely colorful and more elemental looking than previously. 2015 Gali looked like a blue character wearing lots of extra armor plating, like boots and a onesie. This Gali looks like she's wearing much less armor. I can see the silver bits as gloves or boots like usual, and the silver armor on the body doesn't majorly detract from the other colors, thanks in part to the printings. But while her previous stuff looked like some decorated Atlantean warrior who protects the royal family and all that fun stuff or whatever you want to imagine, this Gali has a more simple feel. She strikes me more as someone who would dive into a reef with basically nothing and catch fish with her bare hands. She reminds me a lot more of the olden days of Bionicle on the island Matanui, where everything had a more wild, exotic, tribal feel. Even her weapon is a lot smaller and more modest than previously. Now I love her old weapon, and I'm gonna miss her flippers and mermaid mode, but this weapon's alright. It does have a bit much going on, but it's not as crazy as I was expecting. One end is sort of like a small trident with the middle part dangling on a chain. The other end is a straight up spear, though it also has a nifty little propeller that can be spun with a gear and is what I imagine she uses to pull herself through the water. The colorful effect of the spinning is really nice, and it makes it look like something in a cartoon. So yeah, neat weapon. She looks good posed with it. Her mask is alright. It looks good, very interesting, a bit more like an actual face wearing goggles than her old mask did, I suppose. But the shape and depth of the eye holes barely lets any light piping through, so they fail a little bit as eye holes. It's forgivable, but it's a part of another problem that's actually pretty common with these figures that I'll be sure to bring up in a little bit. I do like her proportions to a point. She's the only one with a unity piece on her back turned the other way, so she doesn't have the artificially thicker neck that her brothers do, and her shoulders aren't as wide, so she does look pretty feminine in that area, just wearing a big, broad, boxy silver chunk of armor over her chest that obscures her femininity a little bit, and I like that. It's not overly girly. They could have made a special piece just for her that looked like a set of rubes, but we've moved past that. Rudaka the Saint. Just a girl ready to fight, but not too covered up. Not so much that she'd have a hard time darting around in a hectic scuffle. Where her proportions start to suffer is in the arms and legs. As with Kopaka, her arms aren't that short, but they're raised so high that they don't reach very far down. And her legs, the thighs are almost as long as Tahu's, and her shins are even shorter. This looks so dumb when you bend her legs and look at them from the side. They're so stumpy. Her thighs are just the right length, I think, but unfortunately the blue shell on this side is placed so low, and the orange play on the other so awkwardly, that she literally looks bare bones in that area. You can see so much more of the skeleton than you should be able to. It's easy enough to hide on this side from most angles depending on how you position the plate, but this side just looks bad, even with that crystal add-on to reach her hip. And her shins, they're way too short, they just are. Couple that with her long body and she just looks weird. I think simply giving her longer bones in the shins, which already exist, and maybe slightly longer arms, and just changing around the placement of some shells would have made her proportions perfect, and this is something that's been bugging me since I first got her. I love this figure, I love Gali, make no mistake about it, but there are things about her that just make me wish that she was a little more graceful. Needless to say, I'm going to make some modifications to her as soon as I'm done filming this. Last year, Gali was my favorite set. This time, she's not. She will be when I'm done with her, but the way LEGO designed her, nah. I know this must sound pretty damning and will make some people reluctant to buy her, but please, if you have some spare longer trench blue bones laying around, use them on her. It stinks to have to fix LEGO's product to make them less ugly, but hey, I feel part of what LEGO is about is changing something to your liking with what you have, making your own version of it that's better, that fits your vision. I mean, you could say that about any truly bad set, but I think it's true in this case. I do think Gali is good overall, at least as a base to build upon, or a parts pack at worst. She's brave and bold and tries a lot of new things, and most of those things work just fine, but still, she could be a little better. Pairing her up with Akita makes her a lot more interesting. Separate they look okay, though it's a little tricky not to accidentally make it look like Gali is hunting Akita, but when they're combined, somehow I don't really miss mermaid mode that much anymore. The true purpose of Akita's unusual function comes into play, as she contorts to line up with Gali for a better combination. Gali gets a pair of over-the-shoulder miniguns, propellers, fins, a tail, and lots more blue added to her color scheme. Good lord, this is an upgrade. She can do so many things now, she's probably better equipped for underwater excursions than she's ever been. While I think this combination looks great as a substantial upgrade and improves our colors greatly, it does have one flaw I'll get into later, and I will say this is another case where the gold mask, as beautiful as it is, becomes sort of distracting. Truth be told, I think she feels more complete with a normal blue mask, which sounds completely backwards, I know. Still, great combination, one of the more interesting ones to be sure. If you happen to get either of these two, just get the other one. They're so much better together than they are apart. That kinda goes for a lot of these guys, and it might sound like a weakness, but it's not that the toys aren't good individually. You just get a really great toy by combining two already good toys. Only one Toa left to go. Lewa. Oh boy. I'm gonna be real with you guys, I think this might be my least favorite Toa, as designed by LEGO anyway. Gali I can live with, but there are some things about this guy that just seem stupid to me. He's okay, mostly, but he has a couple of huge flaws that bring him down. Okay, first, colors. The color scheme is okay. I think he wears the protodermic hair better than most, second only to Kopaka, and his mask is much more reminiscent of his 2001 character than any other mask he's had since then. The weapons are a neat idea, making a pair of modestly sized or super big tonfas. The spinny gimmick is kinda weird, but I don't think these are meant to be spun like propellers, just used as dual-sided blades. The trans-green spiked handles are a neat idea, and the larger blades add some much appreciated green to a creature that desperately needs it. Lewa has a simpler color layout than last year, ditching the Kitoran's yellow for more silver and bits of trans-green. Lots of people have said he's primarily a silver character with green as a secondary accent color, but I think he just barely manages to pull it off. Again, barely. The Borak eyes do help. We're not at 2008 levels of silver just yet. Though I don't think the gray thigh bones help, they just start to make everything blend together. The yellow pins are perplexing. They add a bit more color and give him something in common with Uxar, yeah, but I still think it's kinda bland. I would have liked a bigger focus on green in the torso printing, but I do like what color there is. There is a way to add more green to him, but we'll get to that. In terms of proportions and his build, his body is fine, mostly. He takes a lot of liberties with the arms and legs, though. The legs, I think, turned out fine. The nub knees aren't that big of a deal to me, and it's a good use of the 2009 armor. It's a cool shape that feels more distinct and special than the usual fare. The only problem is how much it limits forward ankle articulation, but that's nothing we haven't seen already. Though I still wish the legs were a little longer, at which point I must sound like a broken record. I think they're okay. Where it really starts to bug me is the arms. First off, the instructions tell you to connect the elbows in such a way that is so stupid I refuse to do it, so I've turned them this way. The arms look alright, but they're weird, and not a good fit for this figure. I appreciate the idea, great, but they're placed so high that he ends up having comically short, tiny-looking arms, and they're so close to the inside of the body that they're the most difficult to pose out of all the Toa's arms. The length is what really kills it for me. They're so short, he looks like a stooge. Why didn't they just give him longer forearms like last year? Would the extra plastic raise the price? He already feels kinda skimpy compared to his previous self, though it's not like I don't appreciate the more streamlined, next-gen model look he has. Heck, in some ways, I think he feels the most reminiscent of Bionicle as people as I know it, but dang it, I'm gonna make some big changes to him. I don't want to sound nitpicky, but this guy is a serious contender for worst Toa of 2016 on my list. I actually think Pohatu is more sound. I still like Lewa, I like all these guys, but I don't like the way LEGO saw fit to design him. I do recommend him, however, if you happen to get Uxar, because the combination is splendiferous. Yes, the two look good side by side, though they're not the most interesting duo of the bunch, but combining them really makes Lewa come alive. Uxar's wings add so much green that it brings things back into focus, which I deeply appreciate, and the wingspan is just impressive. Even Uxar's other limbs can be made to look like little extra wings or feathers or whatever, and the whole display is enough to distract me from Lewa's tiny arms somewhat. Good combination. In fact, Lewa probably benefits the most from his combination, simply because he so desperately needs the coolness it adds. Yeah, I'm sorry for being so down on him. I just think this is the worst example of what the line has to offer as separate figures, even with a decent combination. I'm sorry, he's still good, as I keep saying, but he could have been so much better. So yeah, that's all of the Toa. Tahu, Kopaka, and Onua are pretty great. Gali and Pohatu are good, and Lewa's just okay but not bad. The combinations are very good, even the more off-the-wall ones like Pohatu and Kitar's. I recommend that you get these guys in pairs if you can. The combination gimmick just adds so much playability to each set, though my favorite combo is Tahu and Akir. Kopaka and Melim are probably the best to start with since Kopaka is a good figure on his own. Melim is not that great but still adorable. Their combination is simple but looks pretty cool, and it's cheap. If you have a few more bucks, however, I recommend getting Tahu and Akira, then Gali and Akita, then the jungle characters, then the earth characters, and the stone characters. These figures are a lot of fun. More fun when you have them together. It's worth the money. Now that I've talked about the Toa individually, I want to bring up a couple other things that they all have in common. First, the eyes. Knocking masks or evil facehugger spiders out the figures' faces isn't such a huge focus this year, so the new sets come with a shorter brain stock that's easier to avoid hitting by accident, and accommodates the creatures for combination by not hitting their neck, just like how the creature heads are made to accommodate the size of the Toa's heads by being hollow. This creates a couple of issues for me though. One, they're all the same eye color, save Umarak, whose eyes are orange. This I can live with though. The bigger issue is the almost complete nullification of light piping. Well, light piping there was anyway. 2015's figures already had very limited light piping, but it can get even worse in these guys' case. Even Onua's mask, which lets more light through the back, isn't that effective. Some of the masks, such as Gali's, already make things hard enough by not letting enough light through the weirdly shaped eye holes, but now there's less of a piece to catch the light in the first place, the eyes are even dimmer, and when you put the creature heads over these, well, you may as well give up. I get the feeling that LEGO is well aware of this, and it's why the upcoming summer beasts have entire translucent Toa heads inside their faces, to capture more light. I hope we don't have to go that far with a Toa though, it could end up looking very silly. Okay, rant over. Actually, I will add that the golden unity masks do let a little more light through, since the top of each is translucent. And if I haven't said it already, these masks are beautiful. They're so colorful and candy-like. I was disappointed last year when we didn't get Gali or Tahu's bladed masked with the skull villains, so these make up for that, and they don't look nearly as sickly or drained as the stolen corrupted masks did. If anything, they look a little more alive, and in most cases will fit their Toa now that there is such a huge focus on trans-colored pieces. I say most, because there are always going to be variables. Not every mask in every set is going to be blended the same way, so you might get one that looks beautiful, or not so much. Most of the ones I got look really good though. I like them. They stand out a lot more than last year's golden masks did, and I appreciate that they're being so consistent with which trans color we associate with which Toa and which element year after year. We get so many great new recolors this year. This is just part of the fun of these waves. And once these pieces become more common on sites like Bricklink, we're going to see them used in so many new mocs. Now let's talk about the waist gimmick. You may have noticed there's a lot of two-handed weapons this year. If the figures kept last year's gearbox and swung each arm a different way or only swung one up and down while the other was static, these weapons would be useless. These guys, however, have a new gear mechanism that makes them swing from the side instead of up or down, just like Evo's XL machine a couple years ago, which is really interesting to me now looking back at LEGO's first early efforts to bring functions back into their construction sets. Even some of the brain attack sets, like, that's something they've really wanted to do for a long time and are only now able to pull off with such finesse. I guess it shouldn't surprise me. A lot of their system sets in recent years have some cool trick built in that doesn't usually hamper the toy. Why should their figures be any different? The placement of the knob looks goofy, yeah, but I can live with it. It's no big deal. It had to go somewhere, and it doesn't stick out that far. By itself, the function isn't that impressive, though it is commendable in light of other things I'll get to in a minute. I do like the waist articulation it adds. You see it used in a lot of promotional shots. It's a huge draw for these figures now that they can be more expressive that way. You have so many new posing options now that you didn't before, and there's enough friction that they aren't going to flop around loosely. In fact, there may be a bit too much friction depending on the pieces you get. Some of them fit like a glove and turn without making a sound, while some are so tight and have so much friction they'll screech and fight you every step as you try to turn them. Some of my figures turn without a fuss, and some scream out in pain as their waists are twisted in such an unnatural way. Mileage may vary. Still, it's a cool gimmick that I like a lot, especially with the added benefit that we're no longer using that tired old backbone piece that we've been using since 2011 and I'm so tired of. Oh, thank you! No more exposed ball joints, no more shoulders sticking out too far behind the back. And the builds! The Toa have so many interesting new builds now they don't have to be constructed around such a cumbersome overused piece. I still have a few issues with a new spine, since I wish there was some option to give them shorter necks, but whatever. Every Toa offers a new experience, and some of the ways these pieces lock together with a piece of unity making a good core for the whole thing are downright inspiring to me. They were all fun builds, even if a few of them had some issues, but yeah, it was a good experience. On the one hand, the Toa are really slim now, maybe too much on their own, but it's to give the creatures more clearance when they dock with their Toa, and here's where things get really impressive. I like the creatures, I like the combining gimmick, but I would not have been surprised at all if LEGO decided to ditch the Toa's gear functions entirely for the combining gimmick, sacrificing a big part of the new line's identity to make the next big gimmick possible. And they sort of did, almost, but they still found a way to give the Toa their own entirely new function while making room for the creatures. So that even if you just got the Toa by themselves, they still have a few tricks of their own, and when you combine them with the creatures, their own functions are inherited by the Toa, who still retain theirs. Tahu and Lewa get flapping wings, Pohatu gets swinging claws, Gali gets guns, and Onua gets extra claws for digging. The only one who doesn't get much of a cool new gimmick is Kopaka, which is unfortunate since he's the first combination a lot of kids may get, and this could give them a bad impression of the gimmick. And unfortunately for Gali, as I alluded earlier, Akita reaches so far down, her tail sorta gets in the way of the butt knob. You can still turn it, there is enough clearance for a child's fingers anyways. Us adults? Not that much. Okay, so that's two that suffer for their gimmick. But still, even with some bumps in the road, I still commend LEGO's commitment to making these toys, and not just display pieces that you won't play with much. To make figures that look cool, do cool things, and then do even more cool things together. They've really elevated these toys to a new level. Just compare this to the first time they tried this gimmick in 2008. Yeah, it was neat, but the figures didn't really do anything together. It was just a desperate bid by LEGO to convince you that you have to buy more of these toys. This time the gimmick actually has merit, it has a ton of playability, and very little, if anything, was sacrificed to make it work. That is a feat by itself. I will say though, it does still bug me that while they all have their own builds, the Toa spines and chest plates are the same length. LEGO does want these figures to feel unique. That's why some of these figures are shorter than the others, so they aren't all the exact same height like the Bionicle or something. But this is not a one-size-fits-all kind of body, and while most of these figures look just fine when it comes to proportions, a couple of them do still suffer quite a bit, and I guess it couldn't be helped, though I will make some changes. The important thing is that I like these guys enough to be willing to do that, to want to do that. Now look, I'm sorry I've been a little more negative and critical in spots about these guys than I was last year, but understand that I'm not here to sell LEGO's toys for them. If I think they're good, I'll say so, but I'm not going to ignore or downplay flaws that I see, or hold back my criticisms, and I don't think complaining about the characters' proportions is nitpicking. I do have some other little problems with these new sets, but I don't think it can really be helped. They do so many new things. Some of these things were bound to be kind of ungraceful, but overall these are very good toys, and I praise the designers for the bold new steps they've taken, and the areas in which they've succeeded. And just in case anyone's asking, I think Umarak is pretty great too. He's a lot more interesting than the skulls, that's for sure. He's big, and the antlers add a certain majesty to him. The colors are very dark and give him the feel of a corrupted forest spirit, like some fairy or deity of folklore that was twisted into the grotesque form you see now. I like the legs as technical as they are, and don't think they clash with the rest of him much. I like the range of movement in the shoulder pads made from a shadow trap. I like the extra gimmick of making a shadow trap with him even though I don't use him much. I just like the whole package. When I look at him, I think of the troll under the bridge, you know? The fairies that trick people into their corner of the woods and eat them. The mermaids that drown people because it's fun for them. Old world grim material, you know? The really legit dark stuff that fairy tales are actually about. I just imagine some mother in the countryside centuries ago, telling her children stories about creatures like this to scare them straight. Don't go wandering into the woods, or the horned man will hunt you down and eat your heart and liver. That kind of deal. And the whole Fallen Fae vibe is really driven home by his combination with Uxar. Oh yeah, look at those huge insect wings that perfectly match Umarak's own colors. Look at the feelers atop his crown that is another creature's face that perfectly wraps around his antlers and make him feel like he's mutating even further. Interestingly, Umarak can combine with any of the creatures. Heck, all of the Toa can do that. But this combination really completes the character, I think. I almost want to buy a second Uxar just so I can display him like this all the time. He's perfect in a way. Oh, and another thing, Umarak is huge, especially when merged with Uxar. I mean, all the Toa creature combinations eat up a lot of shelf space, but dang, this guy is something else. Definitely a step up from the Lord of Skull Spiders. Get Umarak if you can. He's a fantastic villain set that matches the Toa blow for blow, with great colors, proportions, and building tricks, and the whole corrupted forest deity vibe is something we've never really seen before in Bionicle, making him such a breath of fresh air after last year's Skelly-Mans. He's quirky, he's dark, he's tough, he's pretty much flawless. But that's all I'm gonna say about him for now, as if I haven't said enough already, sheesh. And since I didn't mention it last time, I think the new boxes are great. There's something about the art that's slightly more dramatic than the Toa's previous box art, taking place later in the day in more extreme environments, or just having harsher, darker colors and tones in general. And showing the creatures, Toa or Umarak in the background is a good subtle way to advertise other sets that I like quite a lot. It kinda tells a story. The boxes themselves are also much sturdier than before. The cardboard isn't that much thicker, but it does make a big difference, and it feels a little more like LEGO, I don't know, cares about protecting these products on their way from the factory to the buyer. And on a last note, I like that Umarak's bow is so huge it reaches over the top of his box and sort of takes it over. That's a nice touch. I also like seeing the Nuva symbols on the other boxes. Going back to the other sets, like I said earlier, these figures may seem like a mess at a glance, but as wild and crazy as they are, they're still tied together by a few well-placed and very well-designed key elements. Is not as clear as the more basic look these characters had last year. They're more like the skull villains in a way. In 2009, we saw a lot of character-specific shoulder pads and weapons that were supposed to make the characters feel kinda different, give them each something unique, but that only helps so much. It was basically window dressing. But like the Skull villains who managed to pull off a new look of their own with just a few new parts used to their fullest potential across the board, these Toa have created their own new look, with the crystals and the weapons and the masks and the creatures, the increased but not quite overdone trans elements, and as much consistency as this does create, they still have some features of their own to make them stand out from each other. Some look more heavily armored than others, some look more bare or sleek, some look more centered, some feel more loose and ready to go. The feel of these characters is still there, and the new parts LEGO's made for them to share, oddly enough, do make this particular bunch of Toa stand out from the crowds of other Bionicle figures and Hero Factory figures released over the years when you'd think it would have the opposite effect. I don't know what to call this new aesthetic, but it works. Bottom line, Bionicle's 2016 Winter Wave is something special. Most of the sets are very good, only a few of them really falling short. But even then, I can't call any of them downright bad, just awkward in places. Not as good as they probably could have been. Some people think pieces like the new chest mold are a mess that were better off not being made and polluting the line. Personally, I think this piece should have been made. I think the piece of Unity, or something on par with that, is something that needed to be made as well, more so even. Is part of this awkward but wholly necessary transition we're still making, as Bionicle transforms from whatever it is into something else, perhaps something even greater. These are the growing pains that we've been going through since last year's winter sets were released, and we're still not done. We're still not all the way there, but the world of Bionicle G2 is richer for it. LEGO is making an effort to have a little of everything for everybody, to make a line of Bionicle figures that will be able to please every sort of Bionicle fan there is, old and new, and yeah, we're still not quite there yet. But we're getting closer, we're leaps and bounds closer now than we were a year ago. If you think of last year as like a caterpillar and this like a cocoon, I look forward to whatever comes next. At this point, if the line survives next year and is allowed to complete this transformation and the growing pains end at last, we could see anything come along. And I can't wait to be there. But for now, I'm just enjoying the ride. On a side note, people have been asking me to make a video about my mocs and revamps and the like, so you know what, I think I might just do that. I'll try to keep it short though. As much as I like these figures, I have made a lot of modifications to them since filming these videos, and let me tell you, these characters have never looked better in my eyes. Toodles for now, peeps. See you in the next G2 video when the summer wave rolls around. Now back to game reviews!